In the summer of 2019, a man named Earl Hutchins drove 3 hours from Wichita to look at an abandoned farmstead his grandfather had once worked as a sharecropper in Reno County, Kansas. The old house had been sitting empty since 1987, sealed up like a time capsule after the last surviving daughter of the original family passed away at 91. Earl brought a crowbar, a flashlight, and no real plan. What he found inside those 4 rooms and 2 outbuildings would take him 11 months to fully catalog, photograph, and research. He found 20 items that, taken together, painted a picture of a way of life so completely forgotten that most Americans today would not recognize even half of them. Some of those items had not been manufactured since 1942. 2 of them had been officially banned from production during the war. One of them, the most extraordinary item on his list, told a story about his own family that nobody had ever told him. If you have ever stood inside an old building that felt like it was still holding its breath, still waiting for someone to come back, you know exactly what Earl felt standing in that dusty Kansas kitchen. This video is about those 20 items. We are going to go through every single one of them, explain what they were, why they existed, and why they vanished. And I will tell you right now, number 7 on this list is something that absolutely nobody talks about, and it explains more about how the Great Depression actually worked than any history book I have ever read. Make sure you subscribe before we get into this, because we have 3 more videos coming out this month that go even deeper into the lost world of Depression-era America, and you do not want to miss them. Let us start with number 20. Number 20 is the fruit jar rubber. This is a thin, flat ring made of natural rubber, about 3 inches in diameter, designed to seal the lid of a mason jar during canning. Today, you can walk into any hardware store and buy a pack of them for a couple of dollars. But in the 1930s, rubber was expensive. Rubber came from far away. Rubber was a luxury that farm families absolutely could not waste. What Earl found in that Kansas farmhouse was a coffee tin containing 47 used fruit jar rubbers, each one washed clean and carefully rolled into a loose coil and stored for reuse. Some of them had been used so many times they had started to crack along the edges. The woman who stored them had patched 2 of them with a smear of pine pitch. She had kept every single one because throwing away a rubber meant the food might not seal, the food might spoil, the family might go hungry in February. That coffee tin full of cracked rubbers is not a quaint antique. It is evidence of a calculation that farm women made every single day during the Depression, the same calculation. Can I get one more use out of this before it finally gives out? Number 19 is the egg scale. Before commercial egg grading became universal in the late 1940s, farmers who sold eggs to grocers or at market had to sort their eggs by weight themselves. A small egg scale, often made of cast iron or pressed tin with a simple balance arm, was as essential to a farm kitchen as a measuring cup. The scale Earl found was a Jiffy Way egg scale, manufactured in Owatonna, Minnesota, still in working condition, with a card tucked underneath it, listing the price per dozen for small, medium, and large eggs at the Hutchinson Co-op in 1936. Large eggs got you 31 cents a dozen. Small eggs got you 19. On a farm producing 200 eggs a week, the difference between carefully grading every egg and just selling them all as mixed added up to real money, money that paid for flour, coal, and kerosene. The egg scale was not a convenience. It was a financial instrument. Number 18 is the sad iron stand. A sad iron, from the Old English word meaning heavy, was a solid piece of cast iron shaped like a modern clothes iron, heated on the stovetop and used to press clothes. Farm families typically owned 2 or 3 so that one could be heating while another was in use. The stand was a small trivet, often ornate with a wooden handle grip, that allowed you to set the hot iron down without scorching your ironing board or your table. What made the one in Earl's farmhouse remarkable was not the stand itself, but what was written on the bottom of it in pencil. Hazels, not myrtles, do not mix up. 2 sisters or 2 women in the household, each guarding their own equipment with the ferocity that comes from owning almost nothing. Shared poverty sharpens the edges of ownership down to a fine point. Number 17 is the bluing bottle. Before modern detergents, white fabric yellowed with age and washing. To counteract this, housewives used a product called laundry bluing, a liquid or powder containing a tiny amount of blue dye that, when added to the rinse water, made white fabric appear brighter and whiter to the eye. The bluing bottle in Earl's farmhouse was a Mrs. Stewart's bluing bottle, still half full, its label faded but legible. The practice of bluing laundry was already ancient by the 1930s, but was universally practiced on farms where Sunday clothes and curtains needed to look presentable, despite being washed in hard well water with harsh lye soap. Bluing was one of the few small vanities that Depression-era farm women permitted themselves. Not because white curtains were a luxury, but because maintaining the appearance of a clean and ordered home was an act of psychological resistance against the chaos outside. Number 16 is the boot last. This is a foot-shaped iron or wooden form, usually mounted on a stand, used for resoling and repairing leather boots. In the 1930s, a pair of good work boots cost anywhere from $2 to $4, which represented several days of labor for a Kansas farmhand. Buying new boots was simply not an option for most families. Instead, the family boot last sat in the corner of the workshop, and fathers and older sons learned to cut replacement soles from thick leather, nail them onto uppers that might be 5 or 6 years old, and keep those boots going for another season. The last Earl found was a 3-piece set, with 3 different foot sizes on the same stand. 1 large, 1 medium, 1 small. A father and 2 growing boys, probably, all sharing the same repair tool across 3 different sized feet. The small one was worn completely smooth on the toe end from years of use. Number 15 is the corn sheller. A hand-cranked corn sheller is a cast-iron device that strips dried kernels off an ear of corn when you push the ear through a circular opening and crank a handle. Before electrification reached rural Kansas in the late 1930s and 1940s, shelling corn for animal feed, for grinding into cornmeal, and for planting seed was done entirely by hand. A family with a corn sheller could process a bushel of ears in about 40 minutes. Without one, they did it kernel by kernel with their thumbs, a job that left the skin raw and bleeding after an hour. Earl's corn sheller was bolted directly to the edge of a wooden workbench in the barn, the bench worn down 3 inches lower on either side of the device from decades of elbows resting there during the work. That worn bench is one of those details that makes you understand labor in your body rather than just your mind. Number 14 is the milk separator. A cream separator is a centrifugal device that spins whole milk at high speed, separating the heavier cream from the lighter skim milk. Cream was worth significantly more than whole milk, and the skim milk was fed to pigs and chickens, so nothing was lost. Hand-cranked separators were standard equipment on any dairy farm in the 1930s. Earl's farmhouse had a Delaval separator, Swedish-made, with a bowl capacity of about 5 gallons. The machine had been cleaned but not reassembled when the farm was abandoned in 1987. Its 30 or 40 internal discs stacked in a basin of what had once been water, now just mineral deposits. Someone had started the last cleaning and never finished. There is something haunting about that incomplete task, the last thing someone was in the middle of doing before a chapter closed. Number 13 is the canning funnel. This is a wide-mouthed funnel, usually made of tin or aluminum, specifically designed to pour hot jam, soup, tomato sauce, or any other canned food into mason jars without spilling. It sounds almost too simple to mention, but home canning in the 1930s was not a hobby or a lifestyle choice. It was survival. A Kansas farm family would put up anywhere from 300 to 700 jars of food in a single summer, working from June through October in a kitchen that regularly reached 110 degrees, with a wood-fired stove going full blast to process the jars. The canning funnel reduced spills, which reduced waste, which could mean the difference between enough food and not enough food come January. Earl found 4 of them in different sizes, hung on nails above the kitchen counter. The largest one had a crack soldered shut with tin. Even the funnel got repaired instead of thrown away. Before you scroll past this, drop a comment below and tell me, did your grandparents or great-grandparents do any home canning? I want to know how far back this goes in your family. Number 12 is the catalog cloth pattern. Before discount fabric stores and before the internet, farm women ordered dress patterns through mail-order catalogs, primarily from Sears, Roebuck, and from Butterick. But in the hardest Depression years, even a 10-cent pattern was a real expenditure, What Earl found folded inside a copy of the 1934 Sears catalog was a hand-traced pattern on newspaper, a copy of a Butterick dress pattern that someone had traced off the original so that the original could be kept intact and loaned to a neighbor. The tracing was meticulous, every notch and grain line marked in pencil. The original Butterick pattern was also there, still in its envelope, marked "Lent to Agnes Nove 34, Return Deck 34," in the same hand. Two women in the same community, sharing a single pattern across multiple dresses, across multiple seasons, caring for it like a document, because to them it was one. Number 11 is the fly screen patch kit. Screen wire on windows kept flies and mosquitoes out of the kitchen and the sleeping rooms, and in a pre-pesticide era, flies in the kitchen meant contaminated food meant illness. Replacing a damaged screen was expensive. Patching it was free if you had the materials. Earl found a small tin box containing squares of different mesh sizes, a small roll of wire, and a pair of fine-nosed pliers, all dedicated to the repair of window screens. The patches had been cut from several different sources. One piece was clearly from a finer mesh, probably a store-bought replacement, while two others were from a much coarser wire that looked like it had originally been hardware cloth. Whatever worked, whatever was at hand. The tin also contained a folded piece of paper with a diagram, hand-drawn, showing how to weave replacement wire into an existing screen without leaving visible gaps. Someone had taught themselves screen repair and written down the method so they would not forget it. Number 10 is the bullet mold. This is a hinged metal mold used to cast your own lead bullets at home by melting scrap lead and pouring it into the mold. In rural Kansas during the Depression, store-bought ammunition was an expense many farm families minimized by casting their own. Squirrel, rabbit, quail, and prairie chicken supplemented the family diet substantially, and a family that could cast its own 22 or shotgun slugs at home from scrap lead was a family that could afford to hunt. Earl found a 2-cavity bullet mold for .32 caliber pistol rounds alongside a small ladle and a block of what appeared to be lead solder. The mold showed heavy use, its sprue cutter worn smooth. This is the kind of item that has essentially disappeared from American life, not because the need went away, but because modern ammunition became cheap enough that the skill became unnecessary and then forgotten. Number 9 is the root cellar map. This is exactly what it sounds like, a hand-drawn diagram showing the layout of the root cellar, and more importantly, what was stored where and in what quantity at the time the map was made. Earl found this taped to the inside of the root cellar door, updated in pencil over multiple years, showing bins of potatoes, hanging onions and garlic braids, shelves of mason jars by type and year, a barrel of sauerkraut, and a section marked simply seed. Managing a root cellar through a Kansas winter was a serious logistical operation. If you did not rotate your stock properly, if you let the potatoes get too warm or the apples too cold, you lost food you could not replace. The map was the operating system of the family's food security. The last entry on it was dated October 12, 1938, after which it was never updated, because by 1939 things had begun to turn around just enough that the family could start buying a little more from town. Number 8 is the harness repair kit. Draft horses pulled the farm equipment, and their harnesses, made of thick leather with iron hardware, were under constant stress. A broken trace or a cracked collar could shut down fieldwork at the worst possible moment. Every working farm in Kansas during the Depression had some version of a harness repair kit. A curved upholstery needle, waxed linen thread, an awl, edge crease tools, and often a small selection of spare buckles and rings. Earl's kit was in a wooden box that had originally been a cigar box, its lid reinforced with a strip of leather tacked along the hinge. The contents inside were immaculate, each item wrapped or tucked into a fitted piece of flannel. Whoever maintained that kit did so with the care of a surgeon tending instruments, because those tools stood between the family's ability to work their land and a crisis they could not afford. You take care of what takes care of you. Number 7 is the relief ledger. This is the item I promised you at the beginning, and it deserves careful attention. During the Depression, the federal and state governments ran various relief programs that provided food, seed, and emergency cash to destitute farm families. Accepting this relief was, for many families, a source of profound shame. Earl's farmhouse contained a small handwritten ledger in a drawer, kept by the head of the household, recording every instance in which the family had accepted government relief between 1933 and 1936. The date, the item or amount received, and, in a third column, the date and amount by which it was repaid or worked off. Seed corn received in April 1934, repaid in kind after the harvest in September 1934. A $20 emergency allotment received in January 1935, repaid by 2 weeks of road repair labor in the spring. The ledger is not a government document. No agency required it. It was a private moral accounting, a record kept by a man for himself, to prove to himself that his family had accepted help, but had paid it all back. That ledger is perhaps the most intimate record of Depression-era dignity I have ever heard described, a document that could only exist in a culture where self-sufficiency was not just practical, but deeply, personally sacred. Number 6 is the lightning rod cable anchor. Kansas farmhouses and barns in the early 20th century were almost universally fitted with lightning rods, metal rods mounted on the roof and connected by braided copper or aluminum cable to a ground rod buried in the earth. The cable had to be anchored to the side of the building at intervals with ceramic or glass insulators to keep it from chafing and grounding prematurely. Earl found an entire box of replacement insulators in the barn, along with the cable clamps and the hand tools used to install them. What made this significant was the care given to the system. The box contained a notebook with a hand-drawn diagram of where every anchor and every ground rod was located on the property, updated each spring after the annual inspection. A single lightning strike could destroy a barn full of hay, a season's worth of feed, and the animals sheltered inside it. The lightning rod system was not something you checked once and forgot. It was a responsibility you maintained the way you would maintain any piece of critical infrastructure, because on a farm with no insurance and no margin, it was critical infrastructure. Number 5 is the ice tongs and icebox shelf liner. Before electric refrigerators reached rural Kansas in significant numbers in the late 1930s, farm families relied on ice boxes, insulated wooden cabinets into which a block of ice was placed at the top, chilling the compartment below by convection. The ice was delivered weekly by route or cut from ponds in winter and stored in insulated ice houses. The tongs were the large iron grips used to carry the 50 or 100-pound blocks from the delivery wagon into the house. Earl found a pair of ice tongs hanging in the kitchen, alongside a stack of corrugated cardboard shelf liners cut precisely to fit the lower compartment of the icebox, each one marked with a year between 1929 and 1941. The liners caught drips and were replaced annually. 12 years of shelf liners, stacked in order, each year a little more carefully cut than the last, as if whoever made them got a little better at the task each year and a little more invested in getting it right. Number 4 is the welfare garden diagram. Similar to the root cellar map, this was a document Earl found tacked above the kitchen window. A detailed hand-drawn diagram of the kitchen garden plot, approximately 30 feet by 50 feet, showing exactly what had been planted in each row, when it was planted, and when it would be ready to harvest. The diagram spanned multiple years, with successive seasons overlaid in different colored pencil, showing the crop rotation that was necessary to keep the soil from being exhausted. Beside the diagram was a list of what each variety was expected to yield and what that yield was actually worth in either home consumption or sale. Tomatoes, bush, 6 rows, expected 200 lbs, last year 180 lbs, value at home 3.60. Beans, pole, 4 rows, expected 80 lbs canned, actual 74 lbs. The garden was managed like a small business, with planning, record-keeping, and post-season review, because for this family it was not a garden. It was a significant fraction of their annual food supply. Number 3 is the Almanac collection. The Old Farmer's Almanac had been published continuously since 1792, and was arguably the single most important printed document on American farms well into the 20th century. It provided long-range weather predictions, planting schedules keyed to moon phases, frost dates, information on crop diseases, recipes, and practical household advice. Earl found a run of almanacs from 1921 through 1949 in the farmhouse, Every year present and accounted for, each one annotated in pencil with the family's actual observations about the weather, the crops, and events of note. 1934, almanac said mild spring. Wrong. Dust hit April 14th, lost wheat. 1936 almanac said wet June. Correct. 3 inches. Best corn since 1928. These annotations transformed a mass-produced commercial publication into a private weather and farming record of extraordinary specificity. A family's running argument with the future. The almanacs are the closest thing Earl found to a diary. Number 2 is the Civilian Conservation Corps discharge papers. The CCC was a New Deal work program that employed millions of young men during the Depression in conservation projects across the country, planting trees, building trails, controlling erosion. Earl found the discharge papers for a young man named Harold, apparently a son or nephew of the household, showing his enrollment in 1937 at age 17, his posting to a camp near Dodge City, and his honorable discharge in 1939. Tucked behind the papers was a photograph of Harold in his CCC uniform, alongside 11 other young men, all grinning at the camera, and a letter written in neat cursive to someone back home describing the bunkhouse, the food, the work of planting windbreaks across western Kansas to stop the dust that had already destroyed so much. Harold describes the work as hard and the food as better than what he would have gotten at home, a statement that is heartbreaking in its plainness. The CCC papers are not a found object. They are evidence of how a nation, at its most stressed, reached down and gave a 17-year-old boy from a failing Kansas farm a way forward. Number 1 is the seed vault. This is the most important item Earl found, and the one that tells you the most about what survival actually looked like in rural Kansas during the 1930s. In the root cellar, inside a wooden crate sealed with a fitted lid and lined with tin sheeting to keep out moisture and rodents, Earl found a collection of seed packets. Not store-bought seed packets. Handmade ones, folded from newspaper and brown paper, each labeled in pencil with the variety name, the year saved, and a germination test date. There were 41 varieties represented: open-pollinated corn, multiple varieties of dry beans, squash, pumpkin, cucumber, tomato, pepper, sorghum, watermelon, and several varieties Earl could not immediately identify. The earliest seeds in the collection dated from 1929, the year the Depression began. The most recent were from 1942. 13 years of seed saving, carefully maintained, tested annually for viability, and stored in a purpose-built metal-lined vault in the earth. Some of those seeds were varieties that had been in the family for multiple generations, varieties that had never been commercially sold, varieties that existed in that crate and nowhere else. Earl contacted the Seed Savers Exchange and the USDA after cataloging the collection. 14 of the 41 varieties turned out to be genetically distinct from any variety in the National Seed Bank. 14 plant varieties that exist today because one family, on one farm in Reno County, Kansas, understood that the seeds were the beginning of everything, and that if you lost the seeds, you lost the ability to begin again. That seed vault is not a Depression artifact. It is an act of long-range faith in a future the family had no particular reason to believe in. It is, in the truest sense, the most American thing on this entire list. What did you think of today's video? If any of these items connected to something you remember from your own family, I genuinely want to read about it in the comments below. This history is not in museums. It is in the memories of people watching videos like this one, and every comment you leave adds to it. Subscribe if you have not already, share this video with someone who would care about it, and I will see you in the next one.